Let's firstly address VP sales versus, say, CRO or versus sales leader. That really depends on the business you're in, but in many ways, you are either at the point of kind of driving the business and the execution with the clients, or you are running a team that is trying to do that. Really, for me, there are three core components of being successful if you are in sales or surrounding. If you have someone on your team where you've got to firstly get past the point of thinking we had the right individuals, right, to say that this person showed me that they had everything that would have made them successful, that they should be successful.
Good afternoon to our listeners and welcome back to the New Well podcast. We have amazingly got Gurdeep here today, who we are going to be talking all things sales leadership, go-to-market with specific emphasis on sales. So I know, obviously, your background, and we've done a little bit of digging before, but just for the benefit of our listeners, do you want to just walk us through your role, how you got here, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, sounds good. And firstly, Laura, look, good to be connected with you on this podcast today. Really appreciate you giving me the forum, and look forward to the discussion to be really. So my time in sales spans around 30 years.
Insane.
Kicked off that at the start in account management, and then worked through various roles for the first 12 to 14 years, looking after clients, developing business, thinking about revenue and kind of revenue attainment. And then moved into the world of sales management. And that was really starting to develop out the enterprise sales function for early stage businesses, moving to more mature businesses, and then really starting to think about how to develop a sales organization and really go quite broad internationally. Built up to being a CRO in that period of time. And, that puts me now currently in my current position as VP Sales at Matillion, where that is looking after all of the revenue function and the teams that develop that from everything outside the Americas. So keeps me busy working across Europe, APAC, Middle Eastern regions. So all good.
I love it. I love it. Anything out of America, people sometimes think, oh, so not a lot there. And it's like, no, EMEA, APAC, it's just like we've got loads of countries in one. And the APAC to US time zone is always very interesting as well. So at least you're just
I can tell you this, trying to do that from London and UK based is interesting enough because, we're having to work across 12 hours there, never mind the US side of things. So I think the challenge still remains, let's make a global core work where you've got the US, you've got Europe, you've got APAC, you've got Australia. I think it makes it a lot of fun. But
yeah, that does make it.
That's part of it, keep it fun.
Yeah, I love that. Also, that's what I always say. I'm like, be humble, be kind, just have fun. That's
Sure.
all I want.
Sure.
I love it. Awesome. So right now, when you're looking at VP of Sales, I'd love to also touch on the CRO role, but what are your top priorities when it comes to what you're doing day to day? Is the business in a stage where it's aggressive scaling, aggressive growth, or is it kind of coming out of that? Because priorities shift at different revenue stages, right? So just for you in your world, I'd love to just talk through kind of what matters most in your day to day, because I think it's an interesting title, right? And what's the difference between that to sales leadership to CRO it's just interesting. So I'd love to hear your top priorities for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions in that, Laura, right? Like let's firstly address VP sales versus, say, CRO or versus sales leader. That really depends on the business you're in, but in many ways you are either at the point of kind of driving the business and the execution with the clients, or you are running a team that is trying to do that. And really, when I think about this, that's very much where most of this lives. As VP of sales, and what does VP of sales mean? In my current role at Matillion, that is very much the sales execution, and that's the account managers, and it's the business development teams, and it's the alliances teams.
Okay.
How does that vary from being a CRO, where revenue gets much broader, where it isn't really just about the sales execution, which is always a fundamental core, but how do you think about that? How does it relate to demand generation? How does it relate to how we think about marketing within the business? How does it actually relate to customer success and keeping customers engaged and kind of growing and all the components of revenue, not just the delivery of the sales angle? So just to try and clear up VP of sales to CRO and what it means to me and what I've seen in the industry, I think that's really a way to think about that, really. How broad is your focus on the impact of revenue within your organization?
So true.
Today, for me, it's very driven around selling, making those sales quotas, making sure the pipeline is healthy and keeping that there. And what does that lead to? To your question about what's important now, it's about really my day to day is about consistency and getting us to a point of consistency. And I always say, sounds like the most boring word, right?
Doesn't it?
The world, consistency is the word, but consistency actually is the core of everything.
100%.
When you have consistency, you have all the success that you're looking for, really. So if you can drive and get consistency, you'll be successful as a business and you'll be successful as an individual if you can just be consistent, really. So that's, the focus of what I'm doing right now is about getting us to consistency. Why is that? Does that mean we've not been consistent? Not necessarily so.
Yeah.
It's maintaining consistency in a world that's evolving quite quickly and that's being disrupted quite heavily by the use and the drive for the incorporation and the adoption of AI in absolutely everything. Right.
I know.
And sales is no different to that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we can touch on the AI thing. I mean, it's insane. Like, I think back to, we built this like sales excellence company, and I just think back to like, if I'd have had the AI, I'm like impartial to it, but I just think the production that it can give you, if I would have had it back then, would have been ridiculous. But just going back to the consistency part. So obviously you're just like hyper focused on like revenue execution, basically, like anything with a revenue number, getting the execution there to essentially be consistent and hitting the numbers. So that's like a huge focus. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about consistency, what does that actually look like? Like, is it a way that you've got the teams, like, is there like a coaching cadence? Is there, like, what does that actually mean? Because it's just like a word that I think people think of, it can just mean different things to different people.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. To say consistency is easy. Consistency is different things for different people in different areas, right? And I think really for me, there are three core components of being successful if you are in sales or surrounding sales, right? And so I think about it as the trifecta of success, really.
Nice.
The first part of that is really the ability to build solid and pipeline that's going to lead to your ability to deliver revenue, right? So put that in a bucket. So consistency around pipeline, right? That means showing up every week ready to build pipeline, but knowing that you've got the right things going on every day that's going to allow you to do that and be actually able to kind of have a process that you work on a day-by-day basis that is measurable by yourself and the team that you're working with to keep yourself honest to growth around that, right? So that's one part of this. The second part of it is actually, if you've got pipeline, can you execute a deal that's meaningful in your business, right? And so the execution of a deal, and you could go into so many layers around that, and you could talk about things like medic and qualification and all of these pieces, but fundamentally, if you've got pipeline, can you take that pipeline and then put that in a predictable way into a cycle that will give you the deal? The third part of that is being a student of the game and keeping yourself absolutely honed to be excellent at what you do and having an interest in staying educated and sharp around this business.
100%.
Right? And so I think about the trifecta as those three things. And so consistency within sales are those things. If you then take that out a layer and think about what do I think about as consistency, can I show predictability to the board and to the executives in our business when it comes to thinking about, is the pipeline healthy? Are the deals able to be executed? Are the people we've got sharp and kind of almost like the Premier League of footballers that are going out to play football every day, right? In a similar sense, do we have the sharpest sales team in the world, or in our market at least? And is that team going to win, right? And those are the core components about what we're trying to get to.
I love those so much. I mean, I could touch on all of them, but it's interesting when you have to take it to the board, right? Because it's just like, what do they care about the most? Well, lead diversification and then like LTV on the back end. But when you look at, I love your point about staying a student of the game, because like, I'm not very good at many things in life, but like I'm hyper obsessed with sales. And that's why I think I've grown businesses and done it, because I've studied it like a sport. Yeah. So we talk a lot about like high performance, and what I find really interesting, and I'd actually love your take on this, and I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but we see like, we work with so many different companies, right? And the one thing I'm continuously seeing is like, if you take a sports team, it's like none of them are practicing any day of the week, and then they're just showing up to their like rugby or football game or whatever they want to do, and they're staking so much revenue on that like specific employee, right? Just like just like in sport, are you really going to show up without practicing through like Monday to Friday when your game's on a Saturday?
Sure.
What we see, and we see this as a huge gap, is they might have top performers that are studying, etc., but they don't have this like literal like obsession and cadence around like quality control of like call coaching, deal execution, content, like the feedback loop. Like it's insane the length in other I see in B2B SaaS, particularly the like elongated feedback loop. I'm like, a call review live on the day should be giving 2 to 3 points back to the rep. They will take that into their next call, and just like the high velocity of that. So we do a lot of that within the business here, because that's where I see the gap across the board. And I'm just like, you stake so much revenue and you have these really long ramp times, when actually if they were just like in the game or as close to the game as possible Monday to Friday, then they'd be able to execute way better. So I'd love your take on, in your world, because I think it's super interesting that you brought that up. What is staying the student of the game like perfect for you in that sense? Because everyone can go and like read the books and stuff, but it's actually about like the reps and the practicing, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that's an interesting question, Laura, because there's a lot about being successful. There's a lot to do with the individual and their desire, their want to do it. And so I think what you've got to absolutely be focused on, if you think about it from a sales leadership perspective and you think about being successful, there is definitely something about the individual that shows up that is core to that person that wants to be ahead of the game, right? Like you can, coach versus develop versus like instinctively there. Like they're all buckets, and I think you can drive success in different ways. But what I personally think is important is firstly making sure that someone has that hunger to want to be successful. And the reason why I say that is because if that's not there, there's a lot of work involved. That's, it's like that classic image of an iceberg where you see the top and you see someone being successful, and there's the layers below and no one sees those layers, right? And they are core to what happens on a day by day and a week by week basis, right? And so is someone going to be willing to work under the surface as well as over the surface to be successful? And so, the individual's got to be locked into being successful. That's there for sure. Student of the game means that actually every day of the week, every week, yes, I'm learning. Yes, I'm thinking about keeping myself sharp by listening to good podcasts like this one, by like reading the right books.
Of course.
But it's actually the application of that on a day-by-day basis. Like, what does that mean in terms of for example, if I'm going to try and develop a pipeline, right? Everyone knows, okay, what I will do is I will do territory analysis. I will maybe score some good accounts. I'll say, right, I'm going to target account A. How do you make sure you understand what is important to that account on a week-by-week basis? Does it mean that you're going to read a series of blogs around that account or what the key execs are being saying on a Monday, and then I'm going to incorporate that into my message on a Tuesday and a Wednesday,
Of course,
and I'm going to try and drive an outcome by, let's say, Thursday or Friday? Right now, that's great to start with. What happens in week 2 when you've got to do that again? What happens in week 3 when you've got to do that again? What happens in week 4 when you've got to do it again? Will you stay consistent at doing that every single week? And will you keep yourself honest about, okay, this didn't work this week, I'm going to change that for week 2 and actually go and do that, and then actually go and do that in week 3? And I think, you've got to be willing to kind of go through that motion. You've got to take what you study, put it into practice, and then you've got to keep yourself honest about evolving that to stay at pace with the market. Because one thing I will say, where you can find something that works for you over a period of time, but that's not going to work forever if you don't evolve with the market and where the market will take you, which is where we are today, right? So you've got to be ready to know that you're going to do that, right? And I often talk about this, right? It's like sales is not an A plus B equals C game, right? What do I mean by that? So if I do A and B, I'm going to get C as a result, right?
It's not true.
So the world doesn't work like that, right? Sometimes C will not come just because you did A and B, and you could do those things really well, but you still won't get the result. If you keep doing that, right, it doesn't mean you won't have a process, you won't work that process, but what you need is a little bit of evolution. Why? Because that company might be different from the last company you dealt with, right? Your product doesn't work exactly like the product you were selling. Someone is having a bad time in the market. Something as the profile of that industry has changed. So you have to keep tweaking what you're doing. Now, there's something about the individual that arrives ready with that and ready with the mindset to know there's a game of being consistent and there's a game of keeping myself evolving and ready to be fit to the market. There's something about, this is what I did in the last company. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It wasn't me.
Isn't it? I think that's incredible, like the evolution part, because isn't it insane how you can have like a top performer in one company and then they come and move into another company? It's like almost like, how are these parallel? Like, because people just think it's the same. And I also think, because we do so much of this like direct coaching, for people that are super like, work with a company at the minute, super intelligent, like ex-Bain, ex-McKinsey, so intelligent on the product side, but just like lack the go-to-market sales execution side, but just like the perfect position to be in, really. But I'm like educating them on like, you will lose more than you'll win in this scenario, and you'll do everything that I'm telling you and you'll still lose deals. So please, just like, it's almost like a mindset game. It's like, get the people that are ready to be hungry, get the evolution, and then just like master that mindset of just being like, this is probably not always going to work, but it's going to win more times than it's going to lose, and that's going to get me to my goal ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, another way to talk to the same thing is, I've been fortunate enough over the years, some of the companies I work with, to seen success personally, but also the sellers that have worked in the teams and the teams I've been a part of, and that's really a part of the collective team. I take no way any kind of success there personally, in terms of it was just what I did, it's what we did as a team. And something I used to say quite often back there was, when you get the glory, when you do that big deal, when you get in a scenario where you're paid significant sums of money, if you're fortunate enough that you're in an industry where you can do that, that's great. But think about what goes into that. In any other industry, if you were to be told you're going to have this outcome, it would involve so much work to get there, right? And, are you willing to do that? Do you wake up ready to put in what's needed for the outcome? Or do you think it's just going to arrive by just kind of running a regular cadence, doing the same things you do every day, and I'll do that and I'll be successful? No. And I think if you can just think to yourself every day and every week, what can I do to be just 1% better today? Just 1% better today. And you can do that over time. I think, that's just a good way to think about, how do I have the mindset then? If I don't think I sit there today, how can I condition myself to think my mindset will allow me to do these things? Well, what can I do that made me 1% better today? Just 1%. Look at where that will take you in 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year.
It's insane, the compound effect of that. Like, it's actually crazy. And that's why I'm so passionate about like, even like live call coaching, where I'm just like, just take this one thing. And I used to do it when I was a rep myself. And like, I'm always learning, and the game's evolved even since I was selling. But like, I used to literally have like sticky notes of just like the one thing that I needed to take into the next call to basically expand my knowledge to getting me closer to a best-in-class sales rep. And I think that like changed the game for me, because one note came to like 2 to 3. And then that was like, if I had 5 call reviews in the week, that was 5 things over a month. That's like 20 plus things that I'm learning, that I'm bringing. And it's just like that pace of just like getting better and excellence. If you've got, and this is obviously for people that have got like the momentum of like low transactional deals that are on these demos continuously, like enterprise is a bit more complex in the sense that you're not going to be exposed to that many reps, but still applies just in a longer term version. That if you can do that and implement it, like that's what genuinely like started to really change the game for me, was when I had leadership that were giving me that feedback. I took that feedback into the next call, nothing crazy, and then just built on that and built on that. And like a month, 2 months flies past and you're just a different rep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly it, Laura, right? It's about evolution. It's about making sure you stay sharp and ready. And I just think it's about being honest with yourself as well, and kind of trying to have that, sales is an interesting world, isn't it? Because you are so up against the coalface, you almost have to project it's perfect every time. And so I think there is something about this idea of, from a leadership perspective, from a kind of sales perspective, you've got to be in the boat together, right? Like one thing that I've always thought, and I try and keep in my, my approach to leadership in the teams that I have led, is to be in the boat with my team and with those sellers, right? 100%. What does that mean? That's like being there. Make sure, yes, there's the leadership and the guidance of what we're trying to achieve, but actually be there next to the team in the deals, right? Be there as they're trying to build out pipeline. Have some kind of session with your team on a 1 to 2 week basis where we're talking about what's working and what's not. Let's just be open about that, right? And so if you show that, if people show you are invested in their success and you've got like empathy across the team in that way, I think that's a key part, right? That often goes missing.
Yeah, it's huge. That's epic, and having that best wins. We interviewed the CEO of Zoom Info, and he said to me that and this is like about like getting in the trench or getting in the boat. He said that I mean, this just must be a brutal day for him, but like we were laughing about it. But he goes into the office and sits on a table and just picks like 10 random people from the office and says, I just need feedback from all of you. Right. I can probably make like a few changes over Slack that can be done, anything longer term. But like, I just thought, that like theory of what you're saying of being with your team, if you've then got it even on a high level where it's like the founder that's coming to you and genuinely asking for feedback, it just makes it feel like such a united front. And it just makes like little things like that can just like, I mean, it's the ultimate competitive advantages like culture and on terms of performance and just something like that. And as simple as just like you doing 1 to 2 weeks, once every couple of weeks, like wins, losses, etc. Just like validates that, you know?
Yeah, it's you know, everyone's there to be successful, right? And everyone's there to get their job done. But I think you're trying to break past the layer to show there's true trust in the team that you're with, right? And how do you do that? You need to be invested in other people's success. You need to show that you're invested in that. Like, yes, I have expectations of what I need my team to do. You know, my board have expectations of what I need to do, but you need to know that they're invested in your success. I'm invested in my team's success, right? Because if at a human level, you aren't able to create that connection, why would someone do their best work for you, right? Why would someone go out on a limb if they think, you know, when my head's turned, this person's not going to have my back? Are they really interested in my success? And, you know, sometimes you have to go through the journey, and this is just life, right? You go through the journey, you throw everything you've got and making the business successful. You know, sometimes it's work, sometimes it's not going to work because you don't have control of everything in the world, right? And it's as simple as that. And ultimately, control the things you can do, put your best work in, try and drive for excellence, right, in the ways that I've maybe talked to earlier. But all you really can do is the best that you can do. And outside of that, have a little fun along the way. We talked to that at the start, right? It's a core tenet I believe in. If you're not having fun,
there's no point. It just comes across so like desperate and like once you master the mindset and you show up just how everything that you just walked through, and then you're also having fun, like it's just like game over. What I would love to ask just on this topic, and then we'll move on. Obviously, you've had like a crazy, you've like 30 years, right? You've been exposed to a lot. We see a massive gap in how do I put this? Like we see a massive across all businesses we work with over index on talent, right? And not so much on like the vehicle, so to speak. Like the vehicle being like the infrastructure to make them successful, i.e. if you're a Formula One driver, you're not going to win in like a Ford Fiesta, right?
Sure.
And it's an interesting topic, but when you think of like that evolution that we're talking about, and it's just reminding me because we're expanding on this point, because I guess it's so widely accepted in B2B, especially in SaaS for like underperformance. I mean, I think the number is still like eye-watering low, like between 30 to 40% of people actually hitting their number across the board, which is just like insane, right? And it's obviously a enablement bottleneck, whether that's the actual enablement team or just specifically their own personal enablement. Yeah. What have you seen work when it comes to like really developing and coaching reps, i.e. if they are underperforming? Have you used any like specific frameworks that you're like, I got poured into this company as a VP of sales, 5 reps are amazing, 5 reps are bad, this is how to get them all up? Because it's just a really interesting one, because the lack of like core coaching, the lack of vehicle, the lack of resources is like insane to me to kind of get, I just can't believe it's still at that number. And just with your experience, I'd just be interested to hear what you've seen work really.
Yeah, it's a good question, Laura. I mean, what I would say straight off the bat is there isn't one thing that works.
Yeah, of course.
No, we're not in a world where I would say if you do that one thing, you're always going to have success.
Yeah, if you do this, all your team will be performing.
Correct, and that's it, right? There's so many factors there, but there is one piece that I think actually there is something that I have seen work quite well, and this is something that I would recommend anyone thinks about really. And it's like, you know, it's if you have someone on your team where you've got to firstly get past the point of thinking we had the right individuals, right? We made a decision. We hired someone having gone through a good enough process to say that this person showed me that they had everything that would have made them successful. Therefore, they should be successful within our business, right? Mm-hmm. So sit down, and if you think about the core competencies of what needs to be achieved, right, have someone honestly score themselves about how they sit on a matrix, right? So, for example, let's just go back to developing pipeline, right? You know, everyone shows up in their interview and they're the best seller in the world, right?
That's the concerning thing with interviewing sales reps.
We're all the best sellers in the world, right? That's who we are. That's what we do, right? We sell. So anyway, then you get into the real world, right? And you get into the true, doing of the job, and you start to see it work or maybe not work. But, if you can sit down with someone and say, okay, let's see, what do we need to do? We need to make quota. In order to do that, you need a strong pipeline. You need to execute around these deals. You need to get into the right kind of contacts, and you need to be able to then go on and, be able to like drive the value proposition of the business, right? Take each of the core components, have the person score themselves about how successful or not they think they've been and where they think the gap is, right? Once
Interesting.
you've got that, then you actually have an agreed ability to coach on something where you haven't called out that you necessarily see a problem, even though I'm not suggesting you don't do that. But if you want to get the buy-in and then for someone to go in and then, work with you on the coaching of what's going to be implemented, I think your ability to sit down with someone and get them to score themselves across all of the key elements that you think are core to the role, and work from there, is a good place to start. How you then go about that, the methodology you may use, are you a challenger shop? Are you a medic?
We could go on for hours about the different sales methodologies.
Correct. And sales methodologies are good. I think I've done about 8 in my time over those 30 years. Look, most of the methodologies out there have something, very good in them. Like, I'm a strong believer by using good process and discipline, but ultimately about application, right? And if you can make sure that you've got some core elements you take from each of those, whether you do one or the other is fine. But keeping this back to this concept and this idea of how do you take an underperforming team, maybe a performing team, sit down, have an honest conversation, get someone to honestly grade themselves on all the pieces that they need to be successful.
Good.
Then develop a coaching plan on each of those pieces, measure it on a week by week basis. And why is that important? Because, like, will they be ultimately successful, become a pipeline development master? I don't know. You will get that, but you will get someone leaning in. You'll get someone bought in the process. You'll be honest along the way. You will see some development, right? And, at the end of that, what you'll find, I'm sure, is if it doesn't work and you can't get success, you will know, and, the person you work will know you threw everything at it and you were both invested in the same outcome. There was no hidden agenda here. And so I think what you get from that is, whether or not you get exactly the success you're looking for in the team, what you will absolutely get is a bought-in team. You'll get a sense of team buy-in and team dynamic with, everyone in your team that will give you other ways of being successful, right? And give you other kind of buy-in, and the mental part of the game starts to get stronger.
I 100% agree. I honestly think that buy-in is critical. It's like if they're literally bought into getting better, it's just like a home run for the
that's half of the game, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So do you, and not, it doesn't need to be specifically at the company right now, but have you seen like a coaching cadence in a way that, like, when you've worked across these multiple different companies, is there a clear actual cadence that reps get from like a Monday to Friday of like, I'll get at least 1 to 2 call reviews a week. I've got a deal review a week. I know that if I'm struggling with X, I'll get a live coaching session on Y, like, or has it just been a complete mismatch? Because we see a complete mismatch. Like, some people I see with like endless documentation that I'm like, no sales rep's even going to click on this, let alone read it all through like Notion, etc. And then sometimes I see people that's like so over the top, I'm like, okay, they just need to be put actually in front of a buyer now. But I would just love to hear from your perspective what that's looked like, just because of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it's going to be a bit of a theme for me, but there's never a one size fits all.
Of course.
And the reason for that is it depends on where the company is at, and it depends on the positioning and like the maturity in the market. And so first thing I will say is it important to have a cadence? Yes, it is. The level of what that cadence looks like just depends a little bit as to how mature the product is and how much is it about, right, the act of the business, which I can talk to in a second. But what do I think it looks like? It's saying, okay, you obviously kick the team off with the priorities for the week. You will obviously forecast at some point during the week. And in between that, there is different time spent on priorities with that team, right? And one of those priorities is going to be, are we developing the pipeline to a healthy level? The other priority is going to be, are we executing and moving deals along? We're going to make quota, right? And so coaching is really focused on those 2 areas. And I think what I found was, what you've got to be very careful around is not having every call almost turn into, how are we kind of doing against the deal and the revenue and the number.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
an easy trap to fall into, right? Which is why it's important to have specific calls with a level of focus around them. What you decide and the level of coaching that you decide upon, it really does depend on the maturity of that team. And so I'm making this point because I guess, from very early on, the focus that I had in the teams and the businesses that I worked in, and I guess the focus now very much leadership has been enterprise and strategic selling.
Yeah, of course.
Because of that, it means, most of the people that I've worked with and the sellers in my team come with at least 5 to 8 years of experience. So is there coaching? 100% there's coaching, but it's not maybe coaching, which is, here's how to have a good call. Here's the kind of questions you should ask. Here's an open-ended question or closed-ended question. All of those pieces, they almost come in as a baseline expectation. Then really the coaching gets very specific to the outcome with a particular organization, to an account, what you're trying to do. But what I found actually can work quite well. You can do individual coaching plans and you can set that up against objectives of what you're trying to do. Is that important? 100%. The maturity of your sales team will dictate the level of what that needs to be and how much you should do it. But should you do that? Yes. I have found that's actually what's maybe even more impactful and powerful are team sessions that work at a kind of a deeper level, really. And so I'll give you one example from an organization I worked at, a couple of years back, which was really about this idea of account strategy days, right? And that would be this idea that we're going to make an account plan a living and breathing thing. And off the back of that, we'll be able to drive success within an organization, right? And there's so many things we hang off this, right? So we had the sales side of the business, we had the customer success side of the business. They jointly owned the plan of success. And we quarterly would have a session that would look to that organization and we would effectively review the account plan, right? And it wasn't just a sales organization, it was the executives. And so what we got out of that was, had we made enough progress? If we hadn't made enough progress, where were the gaps? Number 3, what was the plan looking forward in terms of who we were targeting that we need to get into a conversation with, what we were going to speak around and how we're going to try and drive the business proposition. What would drop out of that was, here's where we're weak and therefore this is what we need to develop some coaching around, right? And so rather than it being textbook, it was actually very focused on an executable plan.
So good.
For an outcome from a business that we were looking for. And so at that stage, it became very real and the coaching became, again, more a buy-in across everyone that was doing that. And so it's a different style of approaching what is the topic of coaching, but you need to find a mix between both the academic and what's real world and practical in terms of the situation in front of you. And so that's something we did. And we had some very, very good outcomes as a team by doing that. Some of the biggest deals we did, in fact, were some of those accounts, 5-year agreements. Actually, one of those deals took us to just under $20 million, I will say. And so really significant outcome. But it was a year on a quarterly basis as a team driving for that. And so that's how we did that.
I love discussing enterprise sales because it's honestly just like the most complex thing ever. People just think it's just like one stakeholder, a few conversations, and it's just like, it's not. It's like so complex. And I feel like in combining doing it with a team rather than individual in a real life scenario, everyone's getting benefit from learning from a real life scenario, because there's not going to be that many if you've got a quota that's huge. Completely depends on the ACV and the revenue. But like if you go over a year for an enterprise sales rep, like true enterprise, there's not going to be that many examples that they can learn from, get better from over that 12 months. But it's not going to be that different. I mean, it's going to be different, but it's not going to be that different to their rep that's to the left of them, that's got another real, and being able to share all of that. I've massively found that, especially when onboarding reps, I've always found if you can onboard like 2 as a pair, it works so much better purely for that exact like mentality that you're thinking of. Like I've managed to like 2-3x ramp time by doing it as a pair, because it brings that competition. It highlights who like the better one. It's just like, it's so good when you just like have people to like bounce off each other in that element.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great idea, though, right? If you've got more than, one who's onboarding at the same time, 100%, joint learning is excellent. Having a buddy is excellent, right? We do that every time. We make sure there's a buddy. I'm sure most people out there are doing this. And it's just the idea that I can speak with someone, they help me get through those early stages. They're keeping me focused on the things. If I have any questions outside of the things I would talk to my manager about. Buddy is a great way to go. But yeah, like, however you may approach onboarding, actually, it's key to be onboarded well. I think it's
Yes.
really fundamental what
God,
happens in
we
those.
could go on a rabbit hole about onboarding.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's its own topic, right? We could spend, another hour and bore your listeners on it, I'm sure. But I
I'm
think, yeah,
so passionate about how fundamentally the onboarding whole system's completely wrong. Like, it just blows my mind that it still is like where it needs to be. But the good news is it can be improved quickly. But it's interesting. But I know we're nearly at time anyway, and I don't want to take too much of your time. But before we wrap, I'd love to hear kind of like, do you have like any key lessons learned or anything that you've really learned when it comes to like sales leadership? Because the one, and this might be helpful for you, but the one topic that comes up all the time on this podcast, but specifically with listeners that comment and write into us, is that they were a top performing IC and then just got promoted into frontline leadership and then never got taught how to coach, right? And I remember being like I remember it happening to me, but not realizing it was happening to me, and then being like, oh, I've just gone from the most selfish role to the most selfless role and not been taught how to do it. But like, do you have any like key lessons learned when it comes to sales leadership, just based on all your experience?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so I think if I was to think about maybe some of the lessons, maybe what's helped me actually, and as I've thought about roles in sales leadership,
Yeah.
elements that were important to me that helped me then think about, being able to be authentic and then therefore ultimately in some level of success. I think you've got to be really passionate about the business that you're in and the technology that you're a part of. And I'm maybe stating the obvious here, Ryan, is that a lesson? It's not necessarily a lesson, but you've got to be able to be, able to show up as the very best person every single day for your team. And you have to have a passion to be able to do that. And the team have to be able to see and feel and believe that passion.
100%.
And so I think, if you're promoted into a company, you will be passionate, I'm sure, about the product you're in because you have been successful and therefore passion, I'm inferring, comes with that. If you're going to join a new business, make sure that you are passionate about what they have and what their industry is and that you feel that you will have success around that. And one that I think is hugely overlooked actually is really think about the sales leadership kind of function and those that you're going to work with.
So true.
And this is sound interesting, but can I have a difficult conversation with the people around me?
100%.
And can I have a difficult conversation with leadership above me? Because sales leadership is not easy. And we're all going to pretend that we're perfect and we're going to deliver our numbers and it's going to be perfect. And in the meantime, back to the iceberg, right? We've got the above the line mountain, we've got the below the line pieces that I'm going to try and figure out and get right? And I need to be able to be honest about some of those things and have real conversations to drive and be successful there. And so I think being honest about the ability to have conversations that are going to be difficult and to be honest about pieces allows you to actually truly have a conversation, right? And think about, being able to drive the right outcomes, the right successes. Final piece, really, there's 3 questions I like to try and think about in every interaction that I have. And they're questions to myself, right? I don't ask anyone those questions. They're just questions I think about to try and help me stay successful, right? And that is, number 1 thought that goes through my mind is how much time do I have before I need to give you a response on anything that I've just been asked? The second thought is, do I really understand the requirements and what you're asking me? And number 3 is, have I really thought about all the alternatives, right? And why those 3 is because if you can think about those and if you have a response and it comes back and you've put something through those 3 layers, it allows me to just think about giving the right response. And it's not just about giving the right response that's going to allow me to be successful against what I'm being asked to do. And I think about that from a leadership perspective, not just about sales leadership, but generally being successful and being able to lead well. If I can think about those elements, then I can usually apply and think about the right way to go about what I need to go and get achieved. If I put that with the other 2, I think that's part of my story, really, and what's allowed me to just, I guess, stay in the game, really, and be here at this stage.
Well, those three are powerful anyway. And you say state the obvious at the start, but so many people miss it. Like so many people don't like, it's like state the obvious to us, but it's great for the listeners. But that last one, those three, I'm glad I asked you the question now, because those three questions at the end, I'm just like, oh, I feel like I need to do that. I feel like that level of critical thinking and that level of being able to like adapt and kind of be agile with the responses is just huge for anyone going into sales leadership. Like actually just pausing, asking those three questions and then responding once answered.
Yeah. I think, look, take with it what you will. I hope it's useful to your listeners. They have always helped me. It's amazing how you kind of have this off the cuff reaction that would otherwise come out. And if you can just slow yourself down,
100%.
take a couple of breaths,
I need that.
The world is not on fire, right? It usually isn't, right?
Literally.
When you have time, think about how you're going to be successful, right? Take a pause. There's plenty of time, right? And there's plenty of good that you can do.
I love it. Awesome. This has been so fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Excited for what this year is going to bring for you guys. It looks like you are on a great trajectory, and yeah, looking forward to catch it. We should actually do this at the end of the year to see kind of like the reflections of what you learned based on those three questions.
Let's do it, Laura. I look forward to it. Look, you too. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciate the conversation, and have a great year. And always happy to come back.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura.